There are few sounds more jarring than the splash of water when you know your pool is supposed to be empty. I was inside making breakfast, flipping pancakes with one hand while scrolling through news on my phone with the other, when I heard it. A big, sloppy splash followed by an unmistakable laugh. I froze. My wife was at her sister's, the kids were with their cousins, and I had just locked the back gate not 30 minutes earlier. The dog, Charlie, let out a confused bark as I walked out the sliding glass door. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. There, lounging on my favorite pool float like she owned the place, was Karen from 3 houses down, wearing oversized sunglasses, a floppy hat, and a leopard print swimsuit that looked like it was fighting for survival. She raised her mimosa and shouted, "You're welcome for warming it up for you." That moment right there was the day normal life ended and the suburban war began. I didn't know what to say at first. My brain short-circuited between fury and disbelief. There were plenty of things Karen had done over the past 6 months to annoy the neighborhood. She complained that my grill smoked too much when I hosted barbecues. She reported my dog for barking, even though her own parrot screamed at 6 a.m. every day. She once even called the HOA because she didn't like the color of my garden mulch. But this was a whole new level. She had scaled my 6-foot cedar privacy fence, trespassed onto my property, and taken a dip in my pool as if she were at a spa. And now, she was smirking at me like she had done me a favor. I managed to ask what she thought she was doing, and she rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. She said it was unreasonably hot, and that since I clearly wasn't using the pool, it was community-minded of her to cool off in it. I reminded her that this was private property and that she had no right to be here. She simply laughed and said, "Don't be such a gatekeeper." I was about to lose it, but then she dropped the real bomb. She had invited 2 of her friends over too. As if on cue, 2 more women appeared from around the side of the house carrying towels and a Bluetooth speaker. They shouted, "Hey neighbor," and walked straight to my lounge chairs. I turned back inside to check my security footage, just to confirm what I already knew. There she was, on camera, climbing over the fence like a sneaky raccoon in flip-flop. I had every angle covered. She ignored the signs, ignored the locked gate, and had the nerve to bring guests. And if she'd done it once, what were the odds she'd do it again? That's when the wheels in my head started turning. I wasn't going to scream or argue or get into some messy scene. No, I was going to let her think she'd won, at least for now. Because I already knew how this war would end, and it would end in the coldest way possible. Later that evening, after she and her guests finally left, I walked the perimeter of my yard. She had knocked over a flower pot, left wet footprints on the stone path, and even helped herself to 2 cans of soda from the outdoor fridge. I wasn't just angry anymore, I felt violated. This was my home, my sanctuary. And now I had to worry about neighbors scaling walls like it was a gym class from the 80s. I called my friend Marcus, who used to work in refrigeration, and asked him a very strange question. What's the fastest way to chill 12,000 gallons of water? Marcus laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But when I told him about Karen and her pool invasion, he got quiet and said, "Say no more." He had access to a portable ice machine used for big food festivals, the kind that could spit out a mountain of shaved ice by the hour. And just like that, Operation Iceberg was born. But I wasn't going to execute it just yet. No, I needed to let her incriminate herself a little more first. I had a plan, but timing was everything. The next few days, I made myself scarce around the yard. I left the gate cracked just enough to look like an oversight. I left a couple of fresh towels hanging on the chair, and even placed a sunscreen bottle on the table. The bait was subtle, but she took it. On Wednesday afternoon, I got the ping from my security system. Motion detected. I checked the camera and there she was again. This time she had a giant inflatable unicorn and a speaker playing obnoxious techno music. She waved to the camera like she was on a reality show. It was perfect. I got screenshots, videos, timestamps, everything I needed to prove she wasn't just trespassing but flaunting it. That evening, Marcus and I rolled up to the backyard with 2 massive ice machines on trailers. We spent hours shoveling ice into the pool. We added water chillers, turned off the pool heater, and even placed a few fake snowflake decorations around the edge. By the time we were done, it looked like Elsa herself had taken over. The pool was now a frozen tundra, a winter wonderland in the middle of suburbia. And I couldn't wait for her reaction. At this point, my wife was fully invested in the plot. She suggested we even hook the outdoor speakers to play holiday jingles. So when Karen inevitably returned, she'd be greeted by Frosty the Snowman instead of Top 40 Summer Hit. Everything was set. We sat back and waited, knowing that suburban justice was about to be served. And sure enough, Saturday morning rolled around, and there she was again. This time wearing a robe, holding a smoothie, and humming like she was on a spa retreat. She strutted into the yard with the confidence of a woman who thought she was untouchable. But when her foot hit that ice-cold water, her scream echoed through the neighborhood like a car alarm. She flailed, slipped, and fell halfway into the pool. Her friends, who had just climbed over the fence behind her, froze in horror. One shouted, "What is this, Antarctica?" I walked out slowly, holding a mug of hot cocoa, and said, "Just winterizing early." She sputtered and demanded to know what I'd done, as if I needed to explain my own property. I reminded her calmly, "This is private land, and you're not welcome here." She tried to argue that I had set a trap. I gestured to the "No Trespassing" signs on the gate and asked if she usually ignores those in real life too. That's when she saw the flashing red light of the camera mounted above the garage and realized this entire thing had been recorded, every minute, every scream, every fence climb. The mask of arrogance slipped just a bit, and her face turned from indignation to panic. I picked up my phone, dialed the non-emergency police line, and calmly explained the situation. While we waited for them to arrive, Karen tried to rally her friends into some sort of fake narrative, whispering behind a towel. But none of them looked convinced. The spell was breaking. When the officer arrived and saw the footage, he raised an eyebrow and asked Karen, "Ma'am, did you climb over the fence?" Her answer was pure Karen, "I was invited spiritually." The officer didn't even blink. He informed her she was being cited for trespassing and possibly facing charges for repeat violations. She exploded into a tirade, accusing the entire neighborhood of ganging up on her. But it was too late. The cold had done its job, and the real storm had just begun. The aftermath of Karen's icy awakening was more satisfying than I had expected, but it didn't mean the battle was over. In fact, her reaction only confirmed what I had suspected all along. She wasn't just entitled, she was stubborn, vindictive, and completely incapable of accepting consequences. After the police issued her a trespassing citation and asked her to leave the property, she stormed out with her towel wrapped around her like a superhero cape, vowing that she would take this to the highest level. I assumed she meant the HOA. And I was right. The very next morning, I received a formal notice from the Homeowners Association accusing me of creating a hazardous environment and operating unapproved refrigeration equipment. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint stating that I had turned the neighborhood pool area into a dangerous ice rink and endangered community members. Never mind the fact that it was my own private pool on my own fenced-in land. The language was clearly crafted by someone who had no grasp of reality and too much time on their hands. I didn't even need to guess who wrote it. The anonymous complainant practically signed it with a leopard print emoji. At first, I was tempted to write a long, angry letter in response. But then I remembered that I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. Karen had walked straight into the frozen trap, and her public tantrum had made her the talk of the neighborhood. The video of her slipping into the frigid water had been uploaded online by my buddy Jared, who titled it "Leopard Karen Takes an Arctic Plunge." Within 24 hours, it had racked up over 500,000 views. People couldn't get enough. Commenters dubbed her names like Queen Freeze and Arctic Karen. One creative user even auto-tuned her scream into a remix. I didn't expect it to go that viral, but when it did, I realized I now had something more powerful than HOA letters: public opinion. While Karen scrambled to recover from her online fame and tried to push a new rule banning dramatic pool modifications in the HOA charter, I started collecting every bit of evidence I had. Security footage, the violation notice, the citations from the police, even old text messages from neighbors who had issues with her before. My goal was simple: build an airtight file so the next time she stepped out of line, it would be game over. But I also had a secondary goal. I was going to expose just how ridiculous the HOA had become under Karen's influence. She wasn't even on the board, yet somehow she was pulling the strings like a discount Bond villain. To make sure I didn't get blindsided again, I set up an extra set of security cameras. One hidden in a birdhouse, one disguised as a lawn ornament, and another embedded into the side fence post. It might have seemed paranoid, but I had a strong feeling Karen wasn't done. She had that look in her eyes when she stormed out, like someone who wasn't defeated, just delayed. And sure enough, 2 nights later, one of my new cameras caught her skulking around the side gate in the dark. She held her phone's flashlight low, crouched like she was on a covert mission. She reached over the fence, tried the gate, and found it locked. She mumbled something under her breath, then walked away. She hadn't done anything illegal that night, but it was enough for me to stay on high alert. The next morning, I got another HOA letter. This one claimed I was disturbing the visual harmony of the neighborhood with my new equipment. By equipment, I assumed they meant the ice machines, which were long gone by then. The HOA demanded an inspection of my property. It was the pettiest thing I'd ever seen. They were trying to push me into a corner using bureaucracy, probably hoping I'd just give up. But instead of getting angry, I smiled. Because now I had all the proof I needed that Karen was weaponizing the HOA to get revenge. And the funny part? She didn't even know how deep she was sinking. I decided it was time to go public. During the next HOA community meeting, which was conveniently being held via Zoom due to a recent storm, I asked to present a neighborly concern. I shared my screen and walked the community through the timeline: Karen climbing the fence, the pool incidents, her friends trespassing, the violation notices, and then I played the now viral video. The chat exploded with laughing emojis and shocked comments. Even one of the board members typed, "Oh my God, I've seen this clip." I then followed it up with screenshots of Karen sneaking around my gate and all the letters I had received. When I was done, I asked a simple question: who exactly is the one disturbing the harmony here? Karen, who had joined the meeting late, suddenly turned on her mic and started yelling that I had manipulated the footage, that I was cyberbullying her, and that I was a danger to the community. But the damage was done. People had seen the truth. One neighbor commented, "If you can't handle the ice, don't trespass into the freezer." Another chimed in, "Maybe don't climb fences if you hate surprises." Karen left the meeting halfway through, and I heard later she filed a formal complaint against the HOA board itself for allowing public humiliation. But by then, even the board had started to see through her nonsense. Still, I wasn't letting my guard down. That weekend, I reinforced the gate and installed a second lock. I also placed a small wooden sign right by the pool deck that read, "Ice may occur. Swim at your own risk." It was just subtle enough to be legal but loud enough to drive her mad. My neighbor Denise, who had always disliked Karen's smug attitude, stopped by and offered to help me file a formal petition to restrict unauthorized HOA complaints. We gathered signatures from 14 homeowners within 48 hours. It was the fastest petition in the neighborhood's history. People were fed up, not just with Karen, but with how easily the HOA could be manipulated by someone with a grudge and a loud mouth. Just when things seemed to be calming down, I received an unexpected envelope in the mail. Inside was a legal notice from Karen's lawyer, or rather, someone claiming to represent her, alleging that I had endangered her well-being and used psychological tactics to embarrass her publicly. I almost choked on my coffee. I handed the letter to my friend Maria, who works in a local attorney's office. She read it, laughed, and said, "This isn't even a real firm. It's a template from an online website." She also noted that no formal lawsuit had been filed. It was just a scare tactic. But it gave me an idea. If Karen wanted to play legal games, I was ready. I contacted a real attorney, not just for defense but to ask about filing a countersuit for trespassing, harassment, and property damage. My lawyer, a calm, sharp guy named Ryan, told me we had more than enough to push forward. He even offered to send a cease and desist of our own, professionally drafted, and filled with citations of local trespass laws, video evidence, and the police citation details. The letter was sent out the next morning. 3 days later, Karen went completely silent. No notes, no rants, no more gate rattling at night. It was like she had gone into hiding. But I knew better. She was quiet not because she was giving up, but because she was plotting something bigger. Karen wasn't the kind of person to let go. She was the kind to double down, even if it meant embarrassing herself again. And I was more than ready. The freeze had only just begun. The silence from Karen didn't last long. In fact, it made me more uneasy than her usual antics. When someone like her goes quiet, it usually means they're winding up for something bigger, sneakier, and 10 times more ridiculous. I kept an eye on everything, double-checking my security footage every morning, scanning the gate locks before bed, and even repositioning my motion-sensing lights just in case she decided to try something stupid in the dark. For 2 full weeks there was nothing. Not a sound, not a sighting, not a single passive-aggressive letter taped to my mailbox. But I should have known she was building up to something, because what came next blew every ounce of pettiness she had ever committed completely out of the water. It started on a warm Friday morning, when I stepped out to water my tomato plants and saw a van parked across the street. It wasn't unusual to see delivery trucks or service vans in the neighborhood, but this one had no logo, no decals. Just a plain white vehicle with tinted windows and a guy sitting in the driver's seat eating a sandwich. He didn't get out. He didn't look around. He just sat there for hours. Around noon, I walked up to the sidewalk with Charlie and gave the guy a friendly wave, expecting some sort of interaction, but he ignored me completely. I went back inside and checked the footage. He had arrived right before 8 a.m. and hadn't moved since. Something about it didn't sit right. By the end of the day, he was gone. But the next morning, there was a letter from the HOA on my doorstep, not in the mailbox. It was thick and typed in formal language, as if someone had used every legal-sounding word from a dictionary just to make it look official. According to the letter, I was now under review for violations relating to misuse of private surveillance, unauthorized pool modifications, and creating a hostile environment for other residents. The kicker? They were calling a special hearing to discuss my behavior, and Karen had requested to attend as a primary witness. That's when it hit me. The van wasn't random. She had hired someone to sit and observe my house, trying to catch me doing something they could twist into another accusation. I laughed out loud in disbelief. Surveillance? The woman who literally climbed over my fence, trespassed, and screamed bloody murder when she fell into a cold pool was now accusing me of violating privacy? I knew I had to act fast, and I wasn't going to wait for the HOA kangaroo court to railroad me. I spent the entire weekend assembling my evidence again, not just for defense, but this time for offense. I wasn't just going to show them Karen's antics, I was going to show them how she had used the HOA like her personal puppet. The day of the hearing arrived, and it felt more like a courtroom drama than a community meeting. The board had set it up in the clubhouse, and about 20 neighbors showed up, some curious, others clearly annoyed to be dragged into another Karen-led circus. Karen walked in dressed like she was attending a corporate deposition, hair pinned tight, folder clutched under one arm like a lawyer without a license. She smiled smugly as she sat across from me. I kept my face calm. The board opened with their formalities, then invited Karen to present her complaint. She launched into a dramatic monologue about how unsafe she felt living near someone who used surveillance to intimidate, who chilled a pool so cold it caused neurological distress, and who had weaponized social media to publicly humiliate her. I could almost hear a violin playing behind her voice. When they asked if she had any physical evidence, she provided a few photos of the ice machines from weeks ago, blurry screenshots from the viral video, and a printed map of where she claimed the cameras pointed. One board member asked if she had proof that any of these cameras captured anything illegal or targeted her specifically. Karen dodged the question, saying that even if it wasn't illegal, it was still emotionally destructive. That's when the tide began to shift. It was my turn. I stood and handed out a packet to each board member. Inside were high-definition stills of her fence climbing, time-stamped footage, printouts of the police citation she received, the first HOA complaint against her, the screenshots of her sneaking around my gate at night, and finally, the cease and desist letter my lawyer had sent. I also included audio from the Zoom HOA meeting where she admitted to manipulating the HOA for personal satisfaction. I ended my presentation by showing the video again, this time with context. The crowd chuckled, the board members leaned in, and one even whispered to another while shaking his head. When the video ended, I asked one simple question. If the roles were reversed and I had been the one climbing fences and inviting strangers onto someone else's property, would I even be sitting here today? There was a long silence, the kind that fills a room with weight. Then one of the board members, a normally quiet man named Greg, cleared his throat and said, "I think we've seen enough." What followed was a unanimous vote to dismiss the complaint against me and initiate an internal review of Karen's repeated abuse of HOA procedures. The room broke into scattered applause. Karen's face crumpled. She tried to speak again, but the board cut her off and told her the hearing was closed. She stood up, hissed something under her breath, and stormed out of the clubhouse like it was a courtroom she'd just lost on national television. In the days that followed, everything changed. The board sent out a neighborhood-wide memo explaining the dismissal and announcing new rules that limited who could request hearings and how many complaints a single homeowner could file in a quarter. It was clearly aimed at stopping Karen's chaos. But the biggest shock came when I heard that two of the board members had resigned quietly, both of whom had previously backed Karen in multiple disputes. Whispers spread that she had used personal favors and intimidation to get them on her side. Now that her influence had cracked, so did her power. Meanwhile, the video kept climbing online. Memes popped up everywhere. Someone photoshopped her onto an iceberg wearing Titanic-era clothing. Another turned her scream into a ringtone. The internet had done what it does best, turned petty entitlement into public comedy. And the more she tried to fight it, the worse it got. I heard she tried to have the video taken down, but it was already backed up on dozens of pages. A local influencer even asked if they could interview me about the situation. I declined, but the attention only made Karen more miserable. Despite all that, I stayed cautious. I knew Karen wasn't the type to disappear quietly. She was a powder keg wrapped in floral print, waiting for the right spark. I installed even more advanced locks on the fence, updated my camera firmware, and added a cloud-based backup just in case she tried to tamper with anything. I wasn't living in fear, I was just prepared. The cherry on top came one weekend when I hosted a small pool party with close friends. It wasn't just to celebrate the win, but to reclaim the space she had tried to take over. People brought drinks, food, and pool floaties shaped like penguins and snowflakes as a playful nod to Operation Iceberg. The deck speakers played nothing but winter-themed songs, and someone even dressed up as Santa. As the party rolled on, I caught a glimpse of Karen peeking through her blinds from across the street, her face barely visible, twisted in disbelief. She had tried to own the narrative, twist the rules, and bend the system. But now she was just a spectator watching her influence melt away, just like the ice she'd once screamed at. Karen's silence didn't last. It never does with people like her. After the humiliating HLA hearing and the community slowly turning against her, she retreated for a while, but I could feel her anger lingering like a storm cloud just waiting to burst. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace, it means plotting. And when she finally acted, it was with the kind of desperation that made her recklessness even more dangerous. One Thursday morning, I woke up to a strange thud in the backyard. At first, I thought it was just Charlie knocking over a flower pot like he sometimes does when chasing squirrels. But when I stepped outside, what I found stopped me in my tracks. The pool deck was trashed. One of the lounge chairs had been thrown into the shallow end, a few decorative lights had been yanked out of the garden bed, and there were muddy footprints leading from the gate to the pool's edge. At first glance, it looked like the work of bored teenagers or maybe even a raccoon on steroids, but when I checked the camera footage, all the doubt vanished. There she was, Karen. At 3:46 in the morning, dressed entirely in black like a cartoon burglar, wearing gloves and a hoodie, and creeping around my yard like she was filming her own amateur spy movie. She had climbed over the side gate again, even though it had been reinforced with metal bars. I watched her on the playback try to pry open the tool shed, dump a bag of what looked like orange powder into the pool, and then slip on her way back over the fence, falling on her side before crawling away like a disgraced villain. I stared at the screen, equal parts shocked and impressed. It wasn't just bold, it was pathetic. She had gone from HOA complaints to full-blown property vandalism. I called the police immediately. They arrived within 30 minutes and reviewed the footage with the kind of expression you usually see on people trying not to laugh in serious situations. One of the officers, a younger guy named Morales, kept glancing at the screen and muttering, "This lady's got issues." After watching Karen stumble and crawl across the flower bed like a wounded animal, they took a formal statement, collected evidence from the yard, and said they'd be filing charges for trespassing, attempted property damage, and destruction of private belongings. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Enough was enough. The next morning, Karen was arrested. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. She was taken from her home without handcuffs, but her expression as she was escorted into the back seat of the patrol car was priceless. Pure fury, mixed with disbelief that she was actually facing consequences for her actions. Later that day, a few neighbors texted me updates, saying they'd seen the officers take her away. Someone even sent me a photo, snapped discreetly from their porch. Karen was yelling something about being set up and how the fence was public property. I couldn't help but chuckle. She had finally gone too far, and this time, the law wasn't letting her squirm her way out. As expected, her arrest triggered more HOA chaos. This time, instead of them targeting me, they were scrambling to figure out how to handle the growing number of complaints they'd received about her. Over the past month, nearly a dozen neighbors had filed separate incidents of harassment, uninvited yard visits, bizarre late-night door knocking, and one neighbor claimed she found Karen in her backyard measuring her fence while mumbling about code violations. The HLA board, already bruised from the public embarrassment during the previous hearing, had to act fast. They announced an emergency meeting to address community concerns and review potential disciplinary action against residents who repeatedly violated privacy laws and community trust. Everyone knew it was about Karen. That meeting was a spectacle. More residents showed up than any previous event in HOA history. People were tired of walking on eggshells around someone who treated the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom. Stories poured in. A couple down the street said Karen had reported them to animal control for their cat, staring too aggressively through her window. Another family revealed she'd called Child Protective Services on them for letting their kids play in the front yard without shoes. The woman had been waging psychological warfare on half the block, and no one had connected the dots until now. The board, after hearing everyone out, voted to suspend Karen's HOA voting privileges, revoke her access to all common spaces, and recommend legal restrictions if her behavior continued. But the biggest surprise came a few days later. One of the new board members, a retired civil attorney named Sharon, did some digging and discovered that Karen had pulled similar stunts in her previous neighborhood. Apparently, she had been part of a different HOA across town and was forced to move after she poured bleach into a neighbor's fish pond because she claimed the koi attracted mosquitoes. That case had gone to small claims court and ended in a settlement, but the pattern was clear. Karen wasn't just a nuisance, she was a serial menace with a long trail of destruction behind her. When this information spread through the neighborhood, the reaction was swift. People who had once politely tolerated her started crossing the street to avoid her. Parents wouldn't let their kids near her yard. Packages were no longer mistakenly delivered to her doorstep and left there, because no one wanted to be accused of trespassing by the very woman who had built her reputation on it. And though Karen tried to fight back with one final desperate move, a hand-scrawled letter posted on every community mailbox claiming she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign, it only made things worse. She had misspelled half the letter and accidentally signed it, Katen, instead of Karen, which instantly became the latest neighborhood meme. Despite all that, I still took precautions. I had Ryan, my attorney, follow up on the charges. The case moved quickly thanks to the video footage and the overwhelming community statements. The court issued a restraining order, forbidding Karen from coming within 50 feet of my property. If she crossed that line again, it would mean jail time. The police also confirmed that the orange powder she dumped in the pool was actually powdered drink mix, an attempt to stain the water and ruin the filter system. Thankfully, my pool guy caught it early, and the damage was minimal. Still, it was enough to classify as vandalism, which made the case stronger. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift. The neighborhood felt lighter, calmer. Kids played on the sidewalks again. People started chatting more during evening walk. There was even a small block party organized by Denise and her husband, complete with music, food trucks, and a bounce house for the kids. I showed up with a cooler full of drinks and was immediately met with smiles and claps. A few people joked that I should run for HOA president next year. I laughed it off, but deep down I couldn't help but feel proud. Not because I had fought back, but because I had stood my ground without stooping to her level. But Karen, of course, wasn't done entirely. One morning, I found a bouquet of dead flowers on my front porch with a note that simply read, "You'll regret this." I reported it immediately and gave the footage to the police. They couldn't prove it was her, but we all knew. Still, the restraining order held, and she kept her distance after that. The note was her final hiss before disappearing into the background, a ghost of chaos slowly fading from relevance. Then came the biggest twist of all. Karen listed her house. No one thought she would do it, but the pressure had finally broken through. She held a few quiet open houses, but turnout was low. No one wanted to live next to the infamous Arctic pool, and word spread quickly that she was the same Karen from the viral video. Real estate agents politely declined to represent her. Eventually, she brought in some discount agency that listed the property for a laughably high price. It sat on the market for weeks, untouched. One day, someone taped a printout of the video thumbnail on the "For Sale" sign with a caption that said, "Free frostbite with purchase." I didn't do it, but I didn't take it down either. Karen eventually disappeared from the neighborhood just as quietly as she arrived. No goodbye, no drama at the end, just a moving van early in the morning and a lingering bitterness that hung over her empty house like a fading echo. And for the first time in months, I stood in my backyard, coffee in hand, looking over the pool that had once been a battleground and now sparkled peacefully in the morning sun. Charlie barked at a squirrel, the fence was intact, and winter had finally ended. The absence of Karen left a strange kind of quiet in the neighborhood. For weeks, her house sat vacant, blinds drawn shut and porch light still flickering from that busted sensor she never bothered to fix. It was eerie, not because we missed her, but because we had gotten so used to her chaos that peace almost felt suspicious. Yet, as days passed and no more fence climbing, no more mailbox rants, and no more bogus HOA complaints occurred, the neighborhood started to breathe again. You could see it in the little things. Neighbors standing in their front yards talking longer, kids riding their bikes in loops around the cul-de-sac, people walking dogs without glancing nervously toward her property. It felt like waking up from a long, bizarre dream and realizing the monster under the bed had finally packed up and moved. I went back to enjoying my weekends in the backyard. The pool had been professionally cleaned, restored from its orange drink mix disaster, and the water was clearer than ever. I even splurged a little and added new pool lighting that changed color at night. It became a quiet symbol of closure. Where Karen had once tried to make a mess, I had built something even better. And the best part was that every time I looked across the yard, I didn't see her peeking through the blinds or whispering threats to the HOA board. I just saw an empty driveway and a for sale sign with a tilted angle and fading ink. Her exit had been as clumsy as her trespass. Still, the story didn't end without one final bizarre twist. About 3 weeks after she moved out, I received a letter. This time, it wasn't an HOA complaint or a bogus legal threat. It was handwritten, on thick floral stationery with a faint perfume scent that I recognized immediately. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable, all harsh angles and dramatic loop. The note read like a strange blend of apology and accusation. She claimed she never meant to cause so much trouble, but also said I should have just shared the pool from the start. She ended the letter by saying, "I hope the water feels colder without me." I read it 3 times, trying to figure out if it was meant as sarcasm or some twisted version of closure. I ended up tossing it in the shredder. Whatever point she thought she was making, it wasn't welcome here anymore. To truly mark the end of the saga, the neighborhood came together for what we jokingly called the HOA cleansing party. It was organized by Denise and Sharon, who took it upon themselves to make it official. They set up decorations in the park down the street, including blue streamers, icy drink stations, and even a homemade sign that read Karen Free Zone. Someone brought a karaoke machine, and before long, the party turned into a full-blown block celebration. People brought food, music, lawn chairs, and even winter-themed outfits as a tribute to the infamous Operation Iceberg. A few of the kids had made cardboard snowflakes with Karen's face drawn in the middle and attached them to sticks like parade float. When I arrived, people cheered and someone handed me a mug of frozen lemonade with a candy cane sticking out. I tried to downplay everything, but they wouldn't let me get away with modesty. Sharon made a short speech thanking everyone for standing up to what she called suburban tyranny, and then handed me a gag gift, a golden whistle with Neighborhood MVP etched on the side. Everyone laughed, and even I couldn't help but accept it. It felt good, not because of the recognition, but because for the first time in months, we were all united by something other than conflict. Karen had tried to divide the community with complaints and drama. Ironically, she ended up bringing everyone closer. As the sun set and the party started winding down, I noticed a couple parked across from Karen's old house. They sat in their car for a while before getting out and walking up the drive. A realtor joined them a few minutes later. I watched from a distance as they entered the house, knowing they were potential buyers. For a moment, I wondered what kind of people would end up moving in. Would they ask about the neighborhood? Would anyone tell them the full story? I didn't want to scare them off, but I also didn't want them to walk in blind. Later that week, I saw the same couple again, this time walking around the neighborhood, chatting with folks, asking questions. When they came to my house, they introduced themselves as Sam and Alyssa. Friendly, early 30s, no kids yet, just a dog named Luna and a mutual hatred of HOA nonsense. We talked for a while about the house, the block, and eventually the question came up. Alyssa asked if there was anything they should know about the previous owner. I looked at them and just said she was a bit of a character. They laughed, clearly aware that there was more to the story. I gave them the basics. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to let them know that things had been tense but had settled down. Sam grinned and said, "Well, we're not the fence-jumping type." I replied, then you'll do just fine here. They moved in a few weeks later, and immediately brought fresh energy to the street. They hosted a casual welcome barbecue, invited everyone over, and even asked for gardening tip. The transition felt natural, like a reset button had been pressed. The dark cloud that had hovered over the house had finally drifted away. Every time I walked by and saw Luna playing in the yard, or Alyssa planting sunflowers by the porch, it reminded me how quickly a place could heal when the poison was removed. Eventually, the HOA drama faded into neighborhood lore. People still brought it up from time to time, usually with a chuckle and a shake of the head. The infamous video lived on the internet, now cemented as part of a Reddit thread titled, "When Karen Gets Frostbite." New neighbors heard about it through whispers and laughs, but it was no longer a source of stress. It was a story we owned now, something we survived together. And strangely enough, it became a reminder of how strong the community could be when it chose unity over fear. For me personally, the whole experience changed how I looked at my home. It wasn't just a place to sleep and grill burgers anymore. It had become a line in the sand, a symbol of boundaries, respect, and standing up when it counts. I had never seen myself as someone who would go to war over a pool, let alone orchestrate an elaborate revenge that involved turning it into a frozen trap. But when you're pushed too far, you learn things about yourself. And in this case, I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or fighting. It's remaining calm, staying smart, and letting people fall into the icy hole they dug for themselves. The golden whistle from the party now hangs near my back door, right above the pool light switch. I don't look at it often, but when I do, it brings a small smile. It's a reminder that no matter how loud or ridiculous someone might get, they can't take away your peace unless you let them. Karen tried and she failed. Miserably. And in doing so, she reminded all of us that when neighbors stand together, even the most entitled storm eventually freezes over. So now when people ask about the pool, I don't tell them the whole story. I just say it gets a little cold sometimes. Makes people think twice before jumping in. And that's exactly how I like it.